if we don't stand up and say something and kind of advocate for our side of things, nothing's going to get done. So if you want things to happen and change, or you're complaining that things aren't changing, you kind of got to step up and take that action in order to get something done. And ACE is your first step to learning how to do it the right way.
Well, that was Shaylee Wahl of Circle talking about how the Montana Farm Bureau's ACE program is helping to develop leaders and ag advocates across the state. In this week's episode of Next Year Country, we sit down with Shaylee and Manhattan farmer Travis Stuber to talk about ACE and why agriculture needs people to step up into leadership roles. We also dive into public lands issues with Shelby Hagenauer of the American Farm Bureau to talk about all the actions that BLM has taken this year with new grazing regulations, updates at the Forest Service, and some potential action on grizzly bears. It's a jam-packed episode of Next Year Country, sponsored by BNSF Railway. It takes more than trains to move a harvest. BNSF Railway invests in track maintenance and safety improvements year-round to help ensure your product gets where it needs to go. Well, what a week we had traveling across Montana. Andy Schwab and I put in literally 1,000 miles driving across the state this week. We drove to Kalispell for the Montana Farm Bureau Summer Conference, Great Falls for the National Barley Growers Meeting. We were in Jordan for Grace McDonald's wedding here recently. Of course, our past intern and broadcaster, Grace McDonald, or I should say Grace Murnion now. So we got to see a lot of country here. Andy, some places look just as green as Ireland, maybe even greener, whereas some have yet to green up. So varying conditions across the state.
To me, it was weird. You got just past Three Forks, you climbed over Cardwell Hill, you dropped down into that Whitehall Valley, and it just went from luscious green to dried out. Then you get on top of Homestake down into Butte, back to green. It was just a little swath of it. And then on our way home, like you're saying, I don't know if I've ever seen Geyser, Montana look that green, that little valley, that little creek that you run through coming out of Great Falls. Holy cow. Like you said, it was offensively green.
Just aggressive green, like they're showing off or something. Like,
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it looked good.
I think we figured out why they call it Dead Man's Basin, because right at Dead Man's Basin is when it went back to drying out. So interesting.
Yeah.
It was, but it was great to see. There's certainly a lot of optimism. You heard it from the producers that have cattle there at the Farm Bureau Federation convention, and there were so many people there. We had to bring in extra tables for the lunch there. It was well attended for it being in Kalispell.
It sure was. But and like I say, good to see some green grass. But boy, there's tough spots. You mentioned the Whitehall area, Rygate, Broadview, Lavina. I haven't been there yet, but southeast and northeast Montana have their challenges. So it's been a variable summer for sure. But boy, it's fun to get to see a little bit of the country. And congratulations to Grace and Cole. I mentioned them getting married this past weekend, so that was a lot of fun. But Colton hasn't got to do as much traveling. He's actually been the one back at the office doing all the work while Andy and I are gallivanting around the country.
That's not true. I went up and down Main Street in the Heights a few times. Very green in the Target parking lot, in case anybody wanted to know. Yeah. No, it was fun to hear your guys' audio coming back and hear convention updates. And it was a fairly quiet news week. There were still some breaking headlines. Of course, at the end of last week, we did hear the announcement that JBS USA will close 2 processing plants again. Of course, one of those facilities in Pennsylvania employs roughly 1,700 employees, has a slaughter capacity of about 2,000 head per day, which is roughly less than 2% of all cattle slaughter in the U.S. The other one, a value-added plant in Memphis, Tennessee, didn't really have a huge effect on the market, but I think there were some alarms kind of sounded a little bit, because this is following the Tyson food plant in Nebraska that closed down. We've already seen the lockout and strikes in Fort Morgan, Colorado. We're losing infrastructure in a time when the cattle markets are performing so well, and there's definitely concerns when this thing does start to turn around slightly. What is that going to do? Because you can't just flip a switch and get infrastructure back.
Well, you said not a lot of effect on the market. The board was up substantially in the 2 sessions following, like $8 higher in the feeders or something, which surprised me. I thought we might be in for some trouble here. I mean, these aren't huge plants that we're talking about, but I think the Pennsylvania one, they're processing 2,000 head a day or up to that level.
Yeah, and you look at when we heard about the strikes in the last few months, we did see some pressure on the board just from having a strike. And so knowing that there could be negotiations coming back, this time we know those plants are closing. There's no ifs, ands, buts about it. It's going to be shut down. We're losing 1,700 employees are losing their jobs, and we're losing 2,000 head per day of slaughter. So it didn't have a major effect, but again, these all just continue to stack up. And I think there's going to be a big concern when this does turn around. what is our infrastructure going to look like?
Well, it'll be interesting to watch those slaughter numbers going forward. Maybe there won't be a big change. Maybe that capacity is just absorbed in other areas of the country because we're running, what, about 76, 78% of capacity utilization right now?
Yeah.
So that there is space to absorb that somewhere else. But kind of makes me think long term. We talk about the need to rebuild the cow herd, but we're pulling back infrastructure so much. It doesn't look like we're going to grow the cow herd this year. Like, I don't know how much more we're going to be able to grow if we ever come out the other side of this thing. Thank goodness we've got this strong market, but it's concerning to lose as much capacity as we have as you look back over the last 6 to 8 months from the packing level. But the cattleman continues to do well, at least to now.
Continues to do well. Another point, and this could be a whole other podcast if we wanted to talk about it, but with the Mexican cattle imports still closed down, we're not seeing that. They're continuing to build their infrastructure. And I can't remember, I was talking to Sky Krebs with NCBA, and he was talking about that's a concern of theirs is, one, we're losing the imports, we're losing infrastructure. They're taking that opportunity to build theirs. So is that going to be a potential market we're not going to see come back to its full potential if the screwworm situation does get handled, if we see Mexican cattle imports come back? That's a big conversation to be had.
Will we be talking about Mexican cattle imports, or will it be Mexican beef imports?
Exactly.
Because they've expanded their packing capacity.
Exactly.
Yeah. And they can do it cheaper. They got the labor. They don't have the same infrastructure, the same wage setup that the U.S. does. And there's a whole lot of factors there that are going to make it pretty attractive to some of those Mexican and maybe even JBS. They're an international company already. I wouldn't be surprised if JBS starts looking at Mexico as a next packing plant operation opportunity. But then again, do we see the same quality of cattle coming out of Mexico? Probably not, but we are also seeing a lot of these big packing plants. A lot of the things they're producing is lean beef. So, that ground beef. And so it's, yeah.
Yeah, sad to see those announcements from JBS. Curious to see if any more are coming down the pipeline here in the next several months. On the flip side of that, we did see some positive news over the weekend. U.S. and Iran have finally reached a peace deal. We've already seen diesel drop 30 cents. Andy, I'm sure that makes you pretty happy right now. Gasoline down at least 50 cents already. The price of oil down from $110 to $75 a barrel today. The Strait of Hormuz is open, so we are seeing, of course, oil and fertilizer come through the strait once again. And fertilizer prices for the second week of June, they did fall 3 to 5%. So definitely expecting them to fall again here in next week's report. It's going to take some time for us to get back to the flow of what we've seen coming out of the strait, but definitely good for producers, for input costs to start to come back down, even though they were still significantly higher, but definitely some improvement.
Well, there's just going to be a lot to watch to see how fast it takes things to return to normal. Do they return to normal? I mean, what's going to be the impact in the southern hemisphere? There was a lot of talk about them switching out of wheat in particular. Does that still happen? And how fast these fertilizer prices come down to levels that make us think we can seed more winter wheat again. We might see a big pullback in winter wheat acres if we feel the fertilizer is still too expensive, or just not put down the level of fertility that you normally would. So a lot of questions yet to answer. Of course, crude oil comes down and grain prices come down too. So It doesn't all feel like winning.
Didn't come down quite as bad as I was expecting, to be completely honest. There was a few positive days here early this week that we did see a decent rally. So definitely still some improvement needed in those grain prices, but glad to see that. To your point on the southern hemisphere harvest, they're starting to see the effects of El Nino already. We've seen some analysts reporting that severe drought is expected on their wheat production. So you add that on top of their fertilizer issues they're going to be seeing coming down the pipeline. There could be some drastic changes when we start to look at 2027 production numbers.
Well, it would help wheat prices to pull down some of these stocks for sure, especially at the global level. But we alluded to it at the top of the show that we were at the Montana Farm Bureau Summer Conference this week. We're actually going to share some of the conversations, a couple interviews that Andy and I did. We took the show on the road, left Colton to do the work. So that'll be fun to share some of those thoughts with you. I think some great conversations.
Yep, absolutely. And of course, we have to say thank you to our sponsor, Western Ranch Supply. Western Ranch Supply is Montana owned and operated, proudly serving farmers and ranchers with quality products and trusted expertise for over 70 years. Trusted by generations because Western Ranch is built by generations.
Well, there's been a really good turnout at the Montana Farm Bureau Summer Conference in Kalispell. And when I mean really good, I don't mean a few people showed up. I mean, it was standing room only at lunch. Carly Johnson had to go get us a table and chairs and more meals so we could even have something to eat. So it was a heck of a turnout at the summer conference, joined here by my cohort, Andy Schwab. Andy, you learned a little about Moose's Lounge last night in Kalispell.
You know, I've heard of sawdust on the floor at different bars. You know, it's in country songs all the time. This is all sawdust floor. It is interesting. The pizza was really good. The beers were coming in these like goblets. You felt like you were back in the medieval days almost. It was a good time. It was certainly a lot of fun here in Kalispell. Yeah, like you said, almost standing room only at the lunch here. I actually like wiped my fork off and gave it to Coulter. Like, you want a fork? And he said
That did
no.
not happen. Don't listen to him.
Okay, maybe it didn't happen, but still, it's a really, really good turnout being in Kalispell this year.
Certainly is. And obviously more than just the fun that we're having here. A lot of important policy discussions. I mean, we're going to talk about public lands today, but we've also talked about water, taxes, livestock, animal health. I mean, you run the gamut. There's a lot of discussions being had here. And we want to zero in on the ACE program that Montana Farm Bureau has put on. Of course, ACE being Advocate, Communicate, Educate. Andy Schwab, an alumni himself. And we're joined here by a couple of ACE members who actually had their meeting here in Kalispell before the summer conference began. So we're joined by Travis Stuber of Manhattan and Shaylee Wahl of Circle. So guys, thanks for volunteering to be on the podcast. We appreciate that.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome.
And so Andy, as an ACE alumni, I mean, you know what these guys were in for. I'm not sure they really knew when they got involved.
Well, Travis and I were talking about this before. The one thing I don't think I realized that was going to happen throughout the course of the 11 months that you're in ACE is the family aspect that you gain from this. I've seen some of my fellow classmates here at the Montana Farm Bureau Summer Conference, and just like that, it was like we were back in class again. We just have that bond that we never had before, and it's just so cool that somebody is a complete stranger to you when you walk into that course, and at the end of it, it's like, I wish my classmates were here with me, because it is just, you get such a strong sense of it. And you learn a lot too. I know, Travis, you and I were talking earlier about, it's a program that's available to Montana Farm Bureau members, but you gain a lot, and it's really inexpensive in the grand scheme of things, because the knowledge that you build is stuff that you can put right back to work in your hometown of Manhattan.
Oh, so true.
Talk to us a little bit. What drew you to ACE? I know you were saying that it was kind of a last-minute decision almost, but it was a good decision.
It was a great decision. I mean, I hadn't even heard of ACE. In fact, we weren't even Farm Bureau members as of last year. So this whole world is very new to me. Now, once being in Farm Bureau, I started looking at a little bit of my family history and realized my family's been a long-time members in Wisconsin when they were dairy farmers. And then I'm like jumping back in, like, whoa, this is amazing. Look what this organization is doing for Montana and the rural parts and the agriculture. And I am just so thrilled to be back, kind of following my family's roots. And this is great. And then learning about ACE. I didn't know anything about ACE until right before I applied for it. Somebody mentioned it. 2 hours later, I was like, I want to do this. Yeah. And I cannot say enough great things about this ACE program. It has been amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Shaylee, coming from Circle, it's not always easy to drive all the way to Bozeman, and now you're driving all the way across the state to Kalispell for the summer conference. What's ACE meant for you in the sessions that you've been through so far?
I think it's been really helpful as far as communicating and kind of figuring out how to express exactly what we're going through. And I think it's so important that farmers and ranchers take the opportunity to tell their story, and how to do that without creating a sense of conflict, so that people can really see it from our side of the pasture, I guess, if that makes any sense.
It does make perfect sense. Makes perfect
Shaylee,
sense.
How far is it from Kalispell to Circle? You got to be one of the ones with the longest drive here.
It's like 9 hours.
Oh my goodness. I travel less of that for an Avs game going from Billings and back. That's awesome. Well, we'll get into kind of your guys' background here. Travis, I'll start with you. I know,
Sure.
As mentioned, you're there in Manhattan. And did I hear regenerative potatoes? Is that one of the...
I am. Yeah, I'm a potato farmer just outside of Manhattan, just right outside of Churchill.
That's interesting. How did you get into that?
Oh, wow. There's a story. But
We got time.
Perfect. So my wife and I came back to the family farm, my wife's family farm, actually, about 8 years ago, cow and calf operation. The neighbor ran potatoes, leased ground for potato on our farm. And when we moved back, he was kind of wanting to look at retiring. And within the first year, he came to us and said, hey, would you be willing to buy us out and take over the operation. And I pretty much said, that would be great. Give us, a few years to kind of understand what's going on, learn the ropes here. And he said, that sounds good. And then he came back a month later and says, I kind of want to retire right now. How about you take over? And we jumped right in, and he says, I'll work with you and help you out. And that actually was how it worked. He actually worked for us and worked with me for the next 5 years and taught me everything I know about seed potatoes. And that's how I got my start. And there we go. That was that.
That is impressive. That is good stuff. Shaylee is actually no stranger to Northern Ag Network. She joined us a couple of years ago when we had our For the Farmers tour in Sydney, and I think we even ran up to Culbertson and it was in that neck of the woods. But
Does that make her a roadie?
that
If she's been on the tour, I don't know. Maybe.
yeah, a groupie.
I don't know if I go that far.
That was such a cool event. It was so cool. If anybody ever has a chance to go to a for the farmer event, it was just neat to have a beer with the producers and have a good time. So it was very enjoyable.
Yeah, good way to say thank you to those who produce the most important aspect of agriculture, possibly beer.
And Shaylee, tell a little bit about your background and what brought you to the ACE program.
So my family has a cow-calf operation in Circle. They have commercial cows, and then they started raising registered red Angus. And so when my husband and I moved back, we go over there and help them work a lot and stuff. But I actually wanted to stay in ag, but their place really wasn't big enough for both me and my brother to come back and work on the ranch. And I wanted to be a part of ag, so I work for the Food and Ag Development Center Network. And so I get to help producers write business plans and grants. And when the ACE leadership class came up, I was like, oh, this is perfect. I can really learn what problems farmers and ranchers are having and what I can do to help them and my family as well to grow and get better and have the opportunities that they need.
Well, Travis, you kind of talked about it earlier, kind of the history Farm Bureau runs in your family, but what are some of the things that you've learned through the ACE leadership class when you start dating back? I mean, Farm Bureau leadership goes back a long, long ways, over 100 years now. What are some of the things that have stood out to you that you're like, wow, that's something that it was a leadership skill then and is still today?
Absolutely. I think right off the bat, when we jumped into ACE, we started kind of the history of the state. And it is always good to be reminded of the history that us farmers in the state have gone through, the ups and downs, and to realize that, hey, there might be a time where you're down, there might be a time where you're up, but this isn't the first time we've been down or up in the ag sector. So this is just kind of a normal thing, and that there's always challenges out there, and to see how the previous generations had conquered those challenges, and hey, there will be challenges in front of us, and we can come together, we can do this, and it's going to be good.
So, Shaylee, fast forward us, 6 months from now, when they're looking for the next ACE class. Someone from Eastern Montana asks you, what is the ACE program? Should I do that? Is it worth my time? What do you tell them?
I think the best part about it is you do make all of these great, wonderful connections with all these different producers from all over the state that kind of share the same issues that you have. And it's just this opportunity to listen to some amazing speakers for practically nothing. I mean, some of the speakers that they've had come in, I'd pay good money now to go see them again. That's how good the quality of speakers they have coming in. From people just coming to talk to you about how to communicate more effectively to having people basically insert a backbone into you if you don't have one. So I would definitely recommend it to anybody. I had a gal that was in the class last year. She actually called me and was like, you have to apply for this program. You're going to love it. And it's everything and more of what I could want out of a program. If there is even a different type of program out there like it, I guess it's very unique.
There are similar programs out there. You think about Real Montana, but this is a great way to communicate and advocate and educate all those folks in the rural communities. And it was a real fun experience, I know. And a big thank you to you, Coulter, and everybody in Northern Ag because it is a time commitment. And folks back at home have to cover your home front while you're gone for 2 days here every month or every other month that it is. So it is a time commitment, and it's, you have to have the support behind you to make it work. But it certainly is well worth it, in my opinion.
Travis, as you think of, you're about halfway through the ACE program now. What are some of the highlights as you look back over the first couple classes that you've been through? What are some of the big takeaways that you'd tell folks about?
Oh, that's hard to put into a
to
small time frame, narrow down. I think Shaylee hit it there when she talked about just the quality of the speakers and what they bring into our little group of 10 people and what the skills that we're being taught, and just the idea that we have a story to tell, that we have these skills, and they just bring those out of you and you go, oh, I see it now. I can use this to promote my rural town. I can use this to promote ag or use that skill in some way to better my community. And it's like the amount of stories and the things that we learn here in this group is so awesome. And the group that we have, we're so diverse. None of us are the same. Our age groups are very varying from younger to older. We all do different things, but yet we have come together just in the last 6 months so much. And we're like, well, we're ready to tackle a lot of big challenges right now. It's really been great.
Shaylee, we kind of talked about it earlier. It's you guys just got the word that, hey, start getting your presentation ready, start thinking about it. What's your initial thoughts of what you might want to do for an ACE project to help out your rural communities?
She's had close to 24 hours to think about this. I'm sure she's got it all worked out.
Yeah, I'm sure you get the roadmap ready.
So my family is beef producers, and so I would really like to try to figure out something to get beef into the school systems and kind of create a sustainable system so it lasts longer than just like the initial year. And I know in these small schools, there's like a really high turnover rate for cafeterias and that sort of thing. And so just trying to maybe put some policies in place in these different rural schools so that we know they want to serve local beef. Just sometimes if you don't make the new hires know that, they take the easy way out. And so just creating those connections and those systems so that those schools can do it constantly. And that's my initial thought. I mean, it could change. Maybe I'll surprise everybody down the road.
Yeah.
But
Little sneak peek there. Well, Travis, what does your county farm bureau need? What does agriculture in the Gallatin Valley need that if there were 3, 4, 5 of you who had been through the ACE program and could bring these skills back that you're learning, what need could that solve locally to really make a difference?
I mean, Bozeman is unique in the way that I would say it's one of the few places in the state that's not real aggy, as in there's just not a lot of agriculture. There is in my little community out by Manhattan, but as you know, Bozeman's Bozeman. I mean, it's not a very good representation of what most of the state is. And I think our young people, across the board, most of the populace doesn't understand what agricultural lifestyle is like. And I think education, getting them to understand and to see what that lifestyle is and how wholesome and how amazing it is. And it's the backbone of America is these rural communities, this agriculture that I don't want anybody to not see that. I don't want anybody to not understand how important this is to America.
Definitely. Well, speaking of America and Montana in general, you guys were in Helena for the off season of the legislative session, but you also had the chance to, visit with Director of Ag and with some of those other leaders. Travis, what was some of the things that you learned on the legislative part, advocating for agriculture in the legislature?
So Helena was really eye-opening to me. My father-in-law was in the legislature, but I haven't been around it enough. It really opened my eyes when we were able to go up there and tour around, talk with different just amazing people up there and just kind of see how the process works, see how ag fits into, what the sessions look like and where some of the challenges are and how Farm Bureau is seeing these issues and how they are defending agriculture in our small rural communities.
Yep.
It was really fun to see. And I was very impressed with how they're doing that up there.
Shaylee, I want to ask you, because Travis talked about the Gallatin Valley not having a lot of ag in there, in the Bozeman area. Circle's pretty different. Ag is everything in Macomb County, of course, but what does your community need? And I know rain is first on the list, of course.
You stole my answer.
But, I mean, as you're thinking, what can we bring back? What can we do to make agriculture stronger locally?
I think to make it stronger locally, there's still this disconnect in these little small towns between the town people and the people that are living outside of town. Obviously, probably 98% of our industry in Circle is agriculture, but there's still that disconnect even in the school system, even in talking to people in the community and stuff. There's that disconnect that I don't think that they totally understand, other than maybe talking about the weather when they go downtown or whatever. But I think we all really need to be better about talking about what's going on and not just, bragging that you had a great crop or whatever, but actually talking about the struggles that you're having and what solutions can we bring forward to make it better. I know I work with a lot of value-added egg producers, and distribution on our side of the state is really difficult. And so, especially with fuel going up, it's only going to get worse for trucking and all of that. And so I just think there's a lot of, if we could all get together and actually talk about it, and not just with other egg producers, it needs to be even with the town folks that maybe aren't as familiar with it, that are supporting egg in their various different jobs and things.
You bet. Well, I appreciate you guys being here to share a little bit of what's going on with the ACE program. It's cool to see how excited you are about it. Any final thoughts of why someone should consider joining ACE? Applications will open probably, November, December?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Anybody that's even interested, even in a little bit, they have got to look into this and give this more of a thorough thought, because I don't know of anybody that wouldn't benefit from what ACE could do for them, for their community, for their farm, their ranch. I have just been blown away of the quality of the speakers and the sessions and just the people that we are surrounded by.
I'm going to echo JM. Yesterday he talked to us about, he's like, I used to kind of just stick my head in the sand and I ignored politics and I didn't want to talk about the conflict. And I was kind of the same way. I don't love arguing with people. And so I kind of just sat back. Well, if we don't stand up and say something and kind of advocate for our side of things, nothing's going to get done. So if you want things to happen and change, or you're complaining that things aren't changing, you kind of got to step up and take that action in order to get something done. And ACE is your first step to learning how to do it the right way, so you're not going backwards.
Yep.
That's almost a radio ad right there. Well said, Shaylee.
Nice
Thank you
talk,
both
Shaylee.
for joining us. Andy's going to go grab our next guest here at the Montana Farm Bureau Summer Conference. But while he does that, we want to give a thank you to our sponsor, Nutrilix, the total livestock supplement. Nutrilix supplement is specifically formulated to provide the nutrients your cattle need to maintain good health and provide a returnable income on your investment, especially in these summer drought months. It's easier and cheaper to supplement grass now than it is to feed excess hay later. And Andy Schwab has brought our next guest over for the Next Year Country podcast here at the Montana Farm Bureau Summer Conference, kind of getting to be a regular guest on Northern Ag Network. Shelby Hagenauer, Government Affairs for the American Farm Bureau Federation. And Shelby, where did you grow up? Where was home for you originally?
Oh, that's a complicated question because my dad was in the Air Force.
I knew that was going to be the answer.
Yeah, so he was a test pilot, and so Dad was stationed at Edwards Air Force Base, Eglin Air Force Base, the Pentagon. We moved back and forth a bunch. They went to Denmark when I was in college, so I moved around quite a bit when I was a kid.
The reason I bring it up and where Shelby grew up is because you've become very knowledgeable about Western issues and particularly public lands.
Well, I will say most of my career as an adult has been working on public lands issues, agriculture, Western water. So even if I didn't live in all the states in the West, I've certainly had a chance to come visit and work on issues in the states.
And it seems like you get back here to Montana and Wyoming at least once a year. It feels like you're finding your way here. Or more.
As much as possible. It's beautiful to come out here. It's such an amazing place. I have not been to the Kalispell area, so this is a cool opportunity for me too.
Well, glad that you were able to make it out. I was thinking back the first time I interviewed you, I think it was at a Wyoming Farm Bureau convention.
That might have been my first trip in like a speaking capacity with AFBF when I had started.
Okay. Well, I remember then, of course, that was a few years ago, and we were talking about, concerns with the, at that point, BLM public lands grazing rule and what's going to happen with the Rock Springs RMP. Fast forward a few years, the situation is very different, and we're getting a ton of information and news out of the Interior Department. It's being received very differently by the grazing community.
That's correct. Probably when we first talked, the Biden administration had proposed what's called either the public lands rule or the conservation and landscape health rule that would have elevated conservation as a use on public lands. That is problematic in a variety of ways, including we didn't believe they had the authority to do that. And so we opposed that public lands rule. We actually litigated over it, filed suit along with the Wyoming Farm Bureau and one of the county farm bureaus. The Trump administration has completely rescinded that rule. And so we're moving forward into a positive direction. Just recently, the Bureau of Land Management proposed updated grazing regulations that will really modernize and update this program for our permittees in the West.
And it feels like we've been talking about updated grazing regulations for a long time. I remember early 2020, it was, the Trump administration's going to come down with these updated rules and it's going to be good. And then COVID happened and you never even heard the phrase grazing regulations again. So now it feels like we're moving at light speed in the Interior Department, bringing this stuff out.
We are. They've been very active. They've been talking about updating grazing regulations with us again, probably for the last, 9 months or so. We're really pleased to see them finally released. We have an open comment period right now through July 13th. And so American Farm Bureau, lots of ranchers, folks are looking at these proposed regulations to see how they would benefit ranchers across the West.
Talk about that a little bit too. I mean, it seems like submitting comments is not exactly the hardest thing to do, but it's also a very important thing to do.
It's critical. American Farm Bureau Federation will write fairly comprehensive comments and it's sort of, I'll pull in the lawyers and we'll talk about NEPA and all that kind of stuff. But when you're looking at a regulation that will impact the daily life of a rancher, it's critical that individuals look at these regulations and say, you know what, this is going to help me and that's going to help me. For example, one piece is updating like sort of the mentee and beginning farmer aspect and definitions in the rule. We talk a lot about succession planning in agriculture right now in the aging rancher farmer community. And so this is an opportunity where they're going to say, hey, it doesn't just have to be like sons and daughters. Perhaps it's somebody else who's a beginning new rancher who you can help kind of transfer your permits in your work to so that they can get a leg up too.
When you're talking to a rancher, at a meeting like this, and they ask you, so what's in these new grazing regs? Because it's a fairly dense document that we're talking about here. I mean, what do you tell them? Well, what's the elevator pitch of here's why you should comment, here's why it's going to benefit you? So
you are correct. It is very dense. They're lengthy, and even just a red line strikeout looking at it is a long document. So here today talking about it, we talked again about that mentee kind of beginning farmer succession planning piece of it. A lot of this is about updating definitions and looking at flexibility. These regs have not been updated in decades. And so things have changed in ranching. And so there's provisions in here talking about flexibility in turnout dates, giving flexibility to folks on the ground in the BLM to work on targeted grazing, maybe when you're doing grazing for like scientific and research purposes, the kinds of data and information that are collected. All of those things make this a more modernized approach to ranching out in the landscape.
Back when we were talking about the Rock Springs and Miles City RMPs, one of the acronyms that kept coming up was ACECs.
Oh, yes.
We're going to see increased areas of critical environmental concern. That's addressed somewhat in these grazing regulations.
I think that ACECs are part of that big, resource management planning kind of piece of it. And I think we're going to see more conversation about that perhaps in the future because, ACECs are there to protect a specific kind of resource like petroglyphs or maybe a species area. The grazing regulations, you're not going to probably have grazing in an ACEC area.
Sure. And I think that kind of ties into one of the changes here is rangeland health standards.
Yes.
Which have been around for a while, but have really only applied to grazing and not all multiple uses.
That's correct. That public lands rule that we talked about, for the last few years did include a proposal that rangeland health standards would apply to all uses on the landscape for BLM lands. And that is carried forward in these proposed regulations. So when you look at what BLM has put out, there's a chunk that is focused on the grazing regulations, and then there's a chunk that is the landscape health, the fundamentals of land health. And those are for all uses across the land. So whether it's a permit for some sort of extractive use, whether it's grazing, all of those things would be covered by this land health focus.
As we think of, public lands, I think one of the first things I remember hearing out of the Trump administration before we talked about the updated BLM grazing rules was the need to increase the beef supply. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways they talked about doing that was getting livestock on vacant public grazing allotments. What does that mean? Is that something that's going to happen? Can someone find one of these vacant and grazing allotments if they want to grow their herd right now and they've got the moisture? What is that?
Yeah, that was part of the initial grazing action plan that the Trump administration, I think that was last fall.
I think so, yeah.
That they talked about. And BLM put it in action earlier this year. If you go online, in fact, if you just Google BLM vacant grazing allotments, I'm sure you can find it. There's actually an ArcGIS website where they did a data call and pulled information from the Forest Service, from BLM, even from the National Wildlife Refuges, because there is some grazing and other types of agriculture on these Fish and Wildlife Service National Wildlife Refuges. You can go look at the map and sort of dig around in Montana and see where there are vacant grazing allotments. And when you click on it, it gives you a little bit of information about kind of who is the local district, who you can call, what's the phone number, and maybe some information about the NEPA status, because obviously the National Environmental Policy Act applies to grazing permits. And so some of them need to have NEPA done. Some of them might be in a better spot. But I would urge anybody who's interested to go find it online and look for it. It was pretty easy to find for me.
Well, and it seems to me that we're seeing some flexibility, or maybe more so some crossover too. We're seeing that, like you said, the Department of Interior and the BLM coming out with these grazing rules. We're also seeing the U.S. Forest Service coming out with some memorandum of understandings to make sure that these ranchers have as much grazing allotments available to them.
Yes, both of those agencies have been working collaboratively to try to get more ranching on the land, grazing on the landscape. because of the benefits it provides for the landscape. So what we just saw on Friday was a memo from Undersecretary Mike Moran. He's the Undersecretary for Natural Resources and Environment at USDA. It's about 5 pages. He sent it out to all the line officers, all the folks who work at the Forest Service at the local level, with a list of things that are kind of like a step down from that big picture MOU. Things like, we're going to have a virtual training session for everybody so that we can all talk about how do you get people onto these vacant allotments. We want you on the ground to use maximum flexibility. We want to give ranchers a voice. And he also talks about expectations for positive engagement between the U.S. Forest Service employees and ranchers. And so it's a great, more focused set of detailed information for U.S. Forest Service employees who are going to interact with our members.
Well, one last topic I wanted to ask you about, Shelby, and kind of taking us away from the public lands grazing to some degree, but in this part of the world, grizzly bears are a huge issue for producers. As the population has continued to grow, we feel that they've achieved the goals that were set for them. They've been on the endangered species list for what seems like ever now, and we're starting to hear rumblings that maybe there's some action that's going to happen on grizzly bears. What are you hearing? Is there any potential for positive news in the future?
Well, we agree with you. The grizzly bear is effectively a recovered species at this point. It's like the wolf, has sort of a tortured history of listings and litigation, and it's challenging. But at this point, it's effectively recovered. During the Biden administration, they were petitioned by some of the western states to create what's called distinct population segments and delist them. The Biden administration denied those petitions and instead put out its own proposal that would create a really one big, large, distinct population segment in the lower 48, and then provide some management strategies, and listed as threatened, I should say, and then provide some management strategies to address things like wildlife-human conflict or wildlife-livestock conflict. That was a step in the right direction in terms of like the management piece of it, but it was awfully bureaucratic, and I don't think it was workable on the ground, without getting into the weeds of sort of how these permits would have been given. And then what we are expecting, though, is the Trump administration right now has its own grizzly bear plan sitting at the White House for review when regulations are proposed. So the Biden administration got all these comments, the Trump administration looked through them, and then they've come up with their own plan that we expect to see sometime in the next month or so, is my guess.
Well, that's exciting. We're certainly looking for it. I mean, you talk about the correlation between grizzly bears and wolves. And of course, wolves are off the endangered species list in this part of the world.
In some states.
Yes. And in Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho, the northern area. Is that the path forward for grizzly bears? Do we have to do it legislatively? Because if the Fish and Wildlife Service takes that action again for what would be the third time to delist, we're likely headed back to the courts.
There's a lot of litigation around endangered species. That's not a surprise to anybody who lives out west and has seen this. There's legislation in Congress to delist the grizzly bear in the same way there's legislation to delist the gray wolf and the Mexican wolf, which is down in New Mexico and Arizona. We're supportive of all these efforts because you're correct. If Congress delists it delists it for good.
I think the greater need here is probably not to individually legislate the delisting of species. It's reform to the Endangered Species Act, something that's been needed for a while. Is there any appetite in this Congress to really take that up?
There is. The House Natural Resources Committee chairman, his name is Bruce Westerman. He's a forester from Arkansas. He actually has a bill called the ESA Amendments Act of 2025 because he introduced it last year. It's the most comprehensive bill to get out of a committee on an ESA reform and potentially go to the floor in like 20 years. It would codify some of the regulations that we have supported that came out of the Trump administration last time. It would address capping attorneys' fees, which is a big part of the litigation issues that we see, provide some more sunshine to those kinds of settlements. It's a positive step in the right direction. It came out of committee in a bipartisan way. It's time for the House to take it up on the House floor and then move it on to the Senate.
Well, Shelby, appreciate you joining us to walk us through some of this. A lot of good news that we get to share, which hasn't historically been the case.
That's correct. There were times when I thought I was giving presentations and I was Debbie Downer all the time, but it's great to provide information about positive steps that the administration and Congress are taking to help our members.
Well, I feel like American Farm Bureau has given you not only some of the most complicated policy out there, but maybe some of the most controversial in a lot of ways too. So we appreciate you explaining it to our members and what it really means.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the chance to visit with you guys and to come out here to Montana and talk to our rancher members, because things like these proposed grazing regs, it impacts them and they can tell me what they think in person. It's great.
It certainly does. Well, that's Shelby Hagenauer, and that's going to do it from the Montana Farm Bureau Summer Conference in Kalispell. We'll send it back to the studio.
great conversations definitely had at the Montana Farm Bureau Federation conference. But now we'll wrap up our podcast episode with a look at the markets. Before we do, we'd like to thank our friend Cameron Bumgardner at Two Gun Western Apparel. Cameron's a one-man shop that handles all the latest styles in Western fashion, along with custom embroidery and branding for your operation. Make sure you go check out the latest gear and designs at twogunwesternapparel.com. Andy, it was a short and action-packed week in the markets. We'll kick it over to you to see what happened.
Well, my hands are burning right now, hot off the press. I mean, hot off the press is the cattle on feed report coming out, showing that the cattle on feed actually up 2% this month in total inventory. We're at 11.7 million head. The placement number, some we've been keeping a close eye on as of lately, it came in 10% below 2025 levels at 1.7 million head, and that was expected to be about 8% lower. So potential positive news there that less cattle placed into the feedlots during the month of May. On the other hand, though, is going to be the marketings. They were down 12% from last year. That's actually the second lowest May marketing number since the series began. The cattle on feed report began in 1996. So that's, of course, marketing's cattle getting marketed out of the feedlot to the packers. Not seeing as much because the price of cattle are just that high, I think.
Well, and then we're adding days on feed for these cattle too, pushing carcass weights. I know we talked about that in the last episode. I think we're on average up about 34 pounds from last year just on some of these weights. So it all kind of just adds in together. But I was surprised. I wasn't sure if the on-feed numbers were going to be all the way up 2% on those expectations. You take the Mexican cattle imports out of it. I know we're obviously adding cattle on feed right now with the drought situation. Curious on your speculations, Coulter.
Well, yeah, what does it mean? That is the big question here. And of course, what the market will do on Monday depends on what those expectations were heading into the report. And I think there is a bullish surprise there on placements with the average guess, like Andy said, down 8%, coming in down 12%. But boy, no one knew what to think of it. The guesses were anywhere from down 11% to up 4%. Yeah. Bit surprising, I think, to see them down so much because a month ago, they were up pretty substantially. And our thought process was, well, that's because of drought. We're having to send cattle into the feed yards early, which I think is still true. But now we're seeing a big drop in those placements. I think you hit the nail on the head, Colton, with those marketings. It's because we're keeping cattle on feed so much longer, feeding them to such heavier weights. We've kind of changed the pattern of how these cattle move. So our marketings pull back very substantially, but beef production is still elevated because we're feeding these cattle, 15, 16, 1,700 pounds now? Yeah. It's a lot of beef we're putting out there. The quality is through the roof. The prime grade is now double select, or has been for 5 of the last 6 weeks. So quality is as good as it's ever been out of the U.S. beef industry, and we still pay by the pound, so those feed yards are feeding those cattle as heavy as they can get them.
I was actually going to send you guys a picture. I went to the Montana Club the other night for dinner, and on their menu it said 2 to 3% prime grade. It's the top 2%, and I wanted to send that to you and say, false advertising. Times have changed. But that leads into a big question. I'm curious on your thoughts on this before we wrap up here. We're seeing such increased days on feed, increased carcass weights. I obviously haven't been around long enough to see the other side of the market, but does that all change drastically when we do start a herd rebuild? Obviously, we're not going to get to levels to 32, 33 million, we don't think, as far as our total cattle inventory. But when we do see an increase, when we do start to turn around, what does that look like?
Well, first off, thank you for making me feel 1,000 years old. Like, oh, Coulter was around for the last cattle cycle. But to your point, yeah, this thing, I mean, in the last cycle, it came back to bite us. We fed those cattle heavier and heavier, and suddenly the supply came back, and it bit the cattle feeders hard. That market plummeted. So I think the risk is still there, but boy, it feels a ways off to me right now with just where we're at from a supply standpoint and demand the way it is continuing to perform. Choice cutout was near $4 at one point this week.
Yeah, about 30 cents away.
Wow. So we've got the product moving. The demand is still there. We're not growing this cow herd. I think the risk is there that feed these cattle to heavier and heavier and heavier weights when you get a lot more of them coming. It could cause some real issues with that amount of supply. But right now, it just doesn't feel like anything that's going to happen anytime soon. But boy, this thing can change fast. Yeah. And we know that it does. But there's a lot of dynamics at play here, and we are learning as we go.
Sorry to make you feel old.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Honest question.
Yeah. Well, another thing that took place this week, of course, was Superior Livestock's Corn Belt Classic. That had over 73,000 head in that auction, the video market, of course, and kind of one of the sets the dynamic of what this year could look like. Let's look over some of those prices. As a lot of these were September, October deliveries. delivered steers and heifers. On the heavy 5-weight steers, averaging 524, light 5-weight steers 571, heavy 6-weight fall delivered steers averaging 463. You get into some of the heifers and maybe not as many head counts there as you saw, but we did see a pretty good test of some of those heifers. We saw the light 5-weight heifers averaging right at $5 a pound, 6-weight heifers averaging right at 446. So wow, what a great way to start the summer video sale season off.
How's that compare back to last year, Colton? I know you were digging through the numbers.
I was on top of doing all your guys' programs throughout the week and trying to track the sale.
Shots fired across the bow.
No, there was, that was one of the things last year. I think we were pretty focused on what the calves were bringing, the program cattle. We didn't really see that premium just because the market was so high. This year, I think it's the same story. Doesn't matter what's coming through. Obviously, there's a little bit of a premium for some of those program added, the NHTCs and the gap programs and whatnot. But even the slides from steers to heifers, very narrow this year. Looking at some of the comparisons and some of the ranches in central Montana that we tracked last year compared to this year, they were up over $1 a pound just in a year. So you're talking 190 or 200 head of cattle. That adds up pretty quick. But I think just rough estimates from what I saw, anywhere from up 12 to 22% year over year basis in the Corn Belt Classic sale.
Well, what do you think happens going forward? A year ago, we saw a really good Corn Belt Classic sale, and that market continued to trend higher all the way through September. Is that going to be the case this year? It certainly feels like, boy, guys just don't know what direction it's going to go. I think it really depends on if this El Nino suddenly brings a lot of moisture to droughted out areas. That could affect the market to some degree.
I think last year we were sitting here and we were talking about all the black swan events that could happen, right? We talked about New World Screwworm. We talked about seeing consumer resistance. Well, now this year, New World Screwworm, it's in the U.S. We're all I think we're all kind of settled around that topic. Mm-hmm. We still haven't seen any consumer resistance yet. I don't think we expected to start off this video sale season up 22% from a year ago. I know we haven't found a top yet, but I don't know if we can see another 20% increase from the June to the August like we saw last year. I think their head counts were below what they saw last year. Of course, the recent rain showers have eased some drought concerns as far as producers in our area. It's still a big factor across the entire U.S., so we might see a heavier July sale. But again, I think we'll be pretty consistent, maybe up 2 to 3% again from a month-to-month comparison. I think it's hard to believe that we could be up another 20%.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I'm going to kind of piggyback on your comment there too about, the July sale probably is going to be the big sales. Of course, Northern Livestock Video Auction is going to hold their early summer special next week on Thursday and Friday, the 25th and 26th. 48,000 head selling in that one. Didn't have time to look back to see what that compares to from last year, but I think we've noticed this over the years anyways, especially as the cattle are getting marketed. They're kind of getting marketed earlier. So I'm a little bit surprised to see Superior Livestock's Corn Belt Classic seeing 73,000 head versus last year over 100,000 head, because I thought we would see a lot of producers wanting to sell as soon as possible, get in on this market before it potentially takes a tank. But like you're saying, there's a lot of factors that we've kind of hurdled over, and it seems to be holding strong enough still.
I think that's a real key, Andy, and a thing to keep in mind that we've already marketed a lot of cattle that would traditionally sell in that July market. Yeah. You remember Torrington Livestock had that huge sale, I think it was in May, where a lot of cattle that would sell as yearlings later in the summer, they're already gone. Northern Livestock Video already held a sale last month, so that pulled some of the supply out. So that could be a driver for this market if those buyers show up and cattle that normally are there have already gone. We're talking about increased placements into the feed yards and the cattle on feed. If that supply is as tight as it could shape up, that provides more upward price support.
It could prove me wrong pretty quick, but I think that's the point we're seeing is I think the guys that needed to consign early, they probably already have. We've already seen them push through, so now we're going to see the consistent buyers, the folks. We talked to Kyle Schob last week, and as a rep, he said, "Stay to the course. Yep. If you can manage to hold through, keep on your same marketing plan that you've done." So I think that's probably what we'll see a lot of in those July sales. You're not going to see the influx because, like you said, frankly, we've probably seen a majority of it come through.
Well, also this week, I mentioned Andy and we stopped in at the National Barley Growers Association meeting. They held that in Great Falls. Of course, Mitch Conan is the president, farmer there at Fairfield. And that was interesting to be able to be a fly on that wall in the meeting and hear the discussion that farmers are having. The barley industry is in a challenging point right now. And the biggest problem is Andy Schwab is not drinking enough beer.
I'm telling you, I'm doing my best.
So what I'm hearing is I was in the studio all week covering the programs, and you guys were just drinking beer and covering the state.
I'm sorry, we're trying to support barley farmers.
Yeah.
That's fair.
I mean, we joke about it, but it is a serious issue. And if we're ever going to get back to, 1 million acres of barley in Montana, there's going to have to be some demand build. I don't know that we'll ever see demand return to that level. Of course, demographics change. The problem is Gen Z doesn't drink beer the way, previous generations did. And so the organization is forward looking, though. They're talking about how else can we use barley and how can we bring back the feed use of barley. Traditionally, we did used to feed a lot of barley to livestock, but what about food use, human consumption, pet food use? So it's fun to see them thinking forward of how can we keep this industry strong. But boy, there are a lot of challenges, not to mention when you start throwing in things like input costs, fuel and fertilizer. So that was an interesting conversation to be a part of. And honestly, for our listeners here, we're going to talk more about it next week, because next week Coors is going to have their barley grower field day in Huntley. So we'll be over there at the elevator. And of course, a lot of growers come to town and they hand out a few awards and just thank growers for what they do. And so I think that'll give us the chance to get into some conversation, not just with growers, but some of the leadership from Molson Coors as well. So that'll be a fun discussion to really focus on the barley industry and how do they move forward.
What were you hearing from producers? Curious at the barley growers in Great Falls as far as crop conditions.
I mean, like you say, all over the place. I think a lot of growers, especially in the Golden Triangle, feel a lot better because of the moisture that we saw here in the last month. But boy, it's creating a lot of variability in the crop. Crops are at different stages, and so it's going to make harvest a little bit difficult. I mean, it all really depends on when you got seeded, too. The guys that seeded later probably benefited from that. Unfortunately, a lot of the winter wheat was kind of burned up before the moisture come in, so that production is going to be down substantially. But the mood is better, and certainly better to hear that the Strait of Hormuz is opening up, and that's going to give us some relief, hopefully, on the input cost side. But this crop is going to be all over the place, and so it'll be interesting to watch versus when harvest starts traditionally and when it ends. It's going to kind of be a long stretch this year, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be big. And of course, as mentioned, we'll be on the road next week with our podcast, visiting with the growers of Coors and Huntley, Montana. The population is going to absolutely quadruple next Thursday when you got the Northern Livestock Video Auction holding their afternoon social. And then also we're going to see the Molson Coors. So going to be a good week next week in Huntley. Appreciate you guys. As you can find all these details at northernag.net. And also you can follow us right along here on Next Year Country Podcast. For Colter Brown, Colton Young, I'm Andy Schwab. Have a great rest of your day.